Hello everybody, I'm Don Counts and welcome into Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6, and today it's going to be an honor and a privilege to talk to a good friend of mine, Mr. Fred Jobe. Good morning, Fred. How you doing, man?
Fine, sir.
Good to see you. Good to see you out. Fred's got this book that he has put together called The Way It Was, and I'm telling you what, The Way It Was looked pretty good reading through the book last night. Tell everybody about who is William Fred Jobe.
William Fred Jobe was born in a hotel room in Newmarket 84 years ago. My mother and father married at Yukon, Tennessee, over here out from Camargo, Yukon. And I was born in the northeast corner of the room at the Newmarket Hotel. And my father was a barber in Newmarket. And I grew up in Newmarket and went to school at Newmarket and played basketball. And of course we didn't have a baseball team then, but I played with the men. My daddy was a good baseball player. He was a pitcher for the Newmarket team, and he was really good left-handed pitcher, so I was determined that I would be a pitcher. So I grew up loving baseball and going with my daddy all over, playing baseball all over the country. And I don't know, we moved around several places in Newmarket. Daddy was always trying to find a place where the rent was a little cheaper during the Depression, because things was tough then, and you could rent a good house for $5 a month. And I guess Daddy was hunting for one he could rent for $2.50 a month. So we moved about twice a year there for several years, and finally settled down in a house down by the creek. And one cold evening, I come home from school, and my mother told me, said, "Fred, Miss Jones may need some coal carried in, make her a fire, it's going to be cold tonight." So I went over there and talked to Miss Jones, and she says, "Yes," says, "my little bucket's full of ashes and I'm out of coal. If you'd take this bucket of ashes out and bring me back a bucket of coal, I sure would appreciate it." So I did. I carried a little bucket of ashes out like a gallon syrup bucket. So I carried the ashes out and I filled it up with coal. And I did that every evening from whatever it was I started in November until about March. And every time I'd get home from school, I'd go do that. And about March, sometime in March, I told Ms. Jones, I said, "Ms. Jones, there is no more coal in your coal pile." And she says, "Yes, I know." So she reached under her apron and brought out a quarter and gave it to me. And she says, "If you'll keep this quarter till you're as old as I am, you'll be a millionaire." And so I took the quarter home and gave it to my mama. And I told Mama what Ms. Jones said. And Mama remembered it, and I remembered it. And when I married in 1947, I'd been married about a week or two and come back home, and Mama brought the quarter out one morning for breakfast and said, "Do you remember this quarter?" I said, "Yes, I do. It was an 1892 Barber quarter. I still have it. It's up here in the bank. So the world can say that Fred Jobe still has the first money he ever made." And I have been a millionaire about 3 different ways for a long time. The first millionaire, I've got 4 children that's the finest children that ever hit this earth, in my opinion. They've all been successful, no problems. And I have a $1 million ring here on my hand where I was a millionaire writing insurance for Alabama Farm Bureau in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then I've owned well over $1 million worth of real estate in my time, and it's all paid for. And for that, I'm grateful and I'm thankful. I've been the most fortunate man in the world, and this county has treated me so good. They have elected me to a county commissioner. I've been appointed to the electorate board. I served as chairman of the hospital board for several years when it was up on the hill up there. And I stayed on the bank board for 18 years. I stayed on the tax equalization board for 18 years. I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce for 4 or 5 years, board of directors there. And then I was on the Farm Bureau, board of directors of the Farm Bureau for about 20 years. I retired from that. And I had to retire from all these boards because my wife suffered a severe stroke in 2001 and paralyzed her left leg, and I had to retire from the electric board, and because we couldn't go on these trips that we were on. The last time we went on a trip, I had to push her through the airport in Dallas, and I said, this is not worth it. But I really enjoyed being on the electric board, and I learned a lot, and I hope I served well. And I recall the first board meeting they had from the electric board. Mr. Walt Shelley was the chairman, the CEO of the electric board. And of course, he brought out all this agenda and all these things, expenses and accounts and all that stuff. And I had never seen anything that it was a great big thick. And we went through it. And I noticed that first thing I noticed was all this expense sheet where the boys had been to the hospital, snake bite, bumblebee bite, poison ivy, shoemake. And I said, what in the world is this? And he said, that's boys that we hire with chainsaws to cut the right-of-ways under the power lines. I said, well, you ought to do that with a bush hog and a tractor. He says, the electric company don't own a bush hog and a tractor. Well, I was kind of took down. I said, well, I just thought to myself, anything this big, at least ought to have a bush hog and a tractor, because out on my farm, we had 2 bush hogs and 2 or 3 tractors that we kept all the pastures clipped and the fence rows cut back. And so that was kind of a shock. And the next thing I noticed on there was they had purchased the dry cleaning place where this warehouse sits, and evidently they had poured the used dry cleaning fluid out the back door. And when they bought it, of course they didn't know that, and then when they started cleaning it up, they found that whatever called that fluid, benzazine or something or other. And there was on there how many tons of dirt had been removed and how much more was going to have to be removed before they could build what's now the warehouse. That was on the first meeting. Then the next thing come up was a $5,000 power pole. And I was, whew-wee, how in the world could you have a $5,000 power pole? So it explained to me that they was building one out here at Kelso, up on that road, up bank by Highway 64. And it had going to have to dig down so deep, to anchor it. And I said, how in the world could one power pole cost $5,000? And of course the board approved it, And Walt told me afterwards, says, about a month from now you drive out there and you'll see about the power pole. So about a month I drove out there, and when I got out there, there's several electric trucks and people, and they had a rope and a bucket dropping it down in a hole, pulling out rocks, and the hole was deeper than whomever was working in the hole. Mm-hmm. So then I saw all that material laying on the ground, so I was satisfied that that's going to be a $5,000 power pole. Well, the board meetings went on and on and on and for that. And I'd say about a couple of years after I was on the board, we was someplace in Texas at one of these machinery meetings. And I had noticed that all the time we'd have these meetings, we'd go out back and see some of the machinery. And I had noticed that the electric company's machinery, pickup trucks and things, looked older than mine did on the farm. And I didn't understand why that a lot of the pickups was older than the pickup I was driving. And I asked Walt one day, I said, Walt, don't y'all ever buy any new equipment? He said, well, we've had a real conservative board lately and they don't like to borrow money. I said, well, now the only way you can do business is borrow money. And so we was in Texas, and it had this Kershaw machine on display, and they was displaying it. And I said, now Walt, there's what you need to clean these fence rows and clean this brush under these power lines, and quit hiring these boys and them get bumblebee stung and snake bit. You need to get this thing to cut it. I says, if you'll buy it today, I'll drive it home. And he eased up to me and says, Fred, don't you realize that you have to put stuff like that on the agenda? You've got to discuss it. You've got to bring it before the budget committee. You've got to bring it before the board. It's got to be approved before we can buy anything like this. Well, see, I wasn't accustomed to things like that. I was accustomed all my life. When I wanted something, I just bought it. I didn't have to ask anybody. Maybe I had to go to the banker and tell him I needed so much money to pay for it. And I wasn't accustomed to all this stuff. So I learned pretty quick that anything come up, it had to be placed on the agenda, and it had to be talked about, it had to be discussed, and it had to be published, and it had to be approved, and then after that, then you had to get the money fixed to buy it. So that was quite a change. And then it wasn't long after we got this fixed up here on the for the dry cleaning deal, we bought the old crushing mill that had Tanner's Mill right down there where the parking lot is, down where you drive in to pay. And when we tore it down, they found out the ground was full of diesel fuel. So the same thing went on. EPA come in here, and I forgot how many tons of dirt and rocks they had to dig out down there before they could start any building on it. So that was a big problem. I remember that real good. But a lot of things I can't remember we did on the board. And sometime along about then, all the dairies in the county started closing. And I was always kind of looked every month to see how many meters we had active. And they ran around 12,000, and sometime a little up, sometime a little down. So I asked one time, I said, why is the meters not going up, or why are they going down some months? He said, well, we used to have X number of dairies, and every dairy barn had a meter. And sometimes there's a meter on the well way down yonder in the pasture. And so they're going out of business, and they're cutting the meters out. Says we're not gaining enough dwellings to take care of the 100 and something dairy farmers that were going out of business real fast. So that got to be a problem. And so at one board meeting, they voted to the charge per meter was so much if you didn't even use any electricity. So we just about doubled that. Walt said there's some places where they had to go read a meter that didn't use enough electricity to pay for reading a meter. So they took out a lot of these meters and consolidate them, and a lot of places where houses had maybe a barn and a house on 2 meters, they then put them on to 1 meter. So we upped the price of the meter from, I don't remember from what to what, but seemed like it's nearly double if you didn't use any electricity at all. And so that worked out real good. That was better than raising the electric rate, just raise the meter base. So, and now they tell me, I don't know, that you don't even have to drive by and get out of your truck and go wade the grass and weeds to read the meter. Now they just claim they read it with a thing in the hand and don't have to read it. So that's progress. I've been for progress all my life. I've liked it, and progress costs money. And I realize that, and you've got to have money to operate on. And this company was operated real good. We borrowed a lot of money, and we built a lot of buildings. We built a lot of lines. And I was over at Frank Ewan at Sarge's shack eating catfish. I love to go over there to eat their catfish. And over there one night, the lights was just almost out. They were just so dim, you couldn't hardly see. And I didn't say a thing in the world about it, because I knew if I said anything, somebody would say something. But I come back to talk to Walt. I said, Walt, that bunch over in Giles County must not have a very good system. I says, the lights over at Sarge's over there at Frank Ewan was just about out when I was over there. He looked at me kind of strange. He said, do you realize that's our customers? I said, no, I didn't. I says, it's a good thing I didn't open my mouth, isn't it? He said, yeah. He says, I'm talking to TVA about building a line from Giles County to give us another feed into this county, and says it will come right through Frank Ewan. Says TVA already has a right-of-way, and all they got to do is build a line, and we're in discussion about building a line. Well, in a few months, they started building that line. Well, I didn't go back over there because I was afraid somebody might say something. So along about that time, I come up about a substation. They bought land out here by Strong's liquor store. to build a little spot to build a substation. And Walt got some contract prices to build a substation, and he says, that's way too high. Says, we can build it. And of course, I didn't know a thing in the world about a substation, but Walt did. So he and Brett Dye and a few more built that substation right by the Strong's liquor store. It's a small, relatively small substation. Well, we all were so proud of them when they got it built. And so about that time, TVA had the line built, and Walt says, now we've got a big one to build. And he got a engineering estimate on it, and he says, that's way too high. He says, if the board will give permission and I can take Brett Dye and whoever else, and said, we can build that substation and save thousands and thousands of dollars. And of course, the board approved it, and we went on. And it took them, I don't know how long to build it, but about the time they got it built, TV had the line built, and then we had a feed all the way from wherever it come in Giles County, all the way across the county, all the way to Kelso. See, before that, if the Kelso station went out, the whole county was out of electricity except Petersburg. I doubt if many people in this county knows that there's a little substation sitting over into Marshall County that feeds Petersburg, which is our customers. It's a little substation. It's getting looking kind of rusty back then. It's a little small, but it feeds that end of the county. And I'll bet you 90% of the people in this county is not aware that Petersburg is fed from a different substation from the Kelso station. Well, they started building on that big substation out there. It's back of where we got the land from Amana. We dickered with Amana for a good while, and I don't remember whether they actually gave it to us or they charged a small amount, but it was relatively small. I kind of believe they just donated it and gave it to us, but I'm not sure of that. But I'm almost positive it was a very small amount. So they started building that substation. Well, they started building that one, and TVA got the line built. And one day Walt called me and says, "Listen," said, "I have found a spot over there at Frank Ewan that I can buy for X number of dollars, and it's right under the TVA line." And says, "Would you be willing to come in for a call meeting and we'll discuss it?" And so we did. And how in the world anybody could have been as lucky as Walt was, he found a place right under the power line, right by the road, where you didn't even have to have a driveway to get to it, and the only level spot in that community big enough to put a substation. I guess it's about a quarter of an acre there was flat. Hills on each side. You know, Don, you know where it is. Mm-hmm. And so Brett Dye went to building on that. And they had it ready by the time TV had their line on. So now Frank Ewan had all the electricity they needed after we got it built, and TVA got that land built. Then they built this big one out here that behind Amana, and that took quite a while. And Walt went out there, and I went with him several times, and Brett would be a little puzzled, and they'd be looking at things, and Walt would stand there over him a good while, and he'd look and say, look, and they'd say they had the schematics, I think he called them, and they'd look at about 5 or 6 different pieces going in every direction. And they'd finally say, well, it goes up there. And so they built that big substation out there with in-house help. And then Brett told me years later that they have built several more, and I have no knowledge of those. And I stayed on the board until when, Don?
You was on from July '89 to July of '98.
I was on from '89 until '98. I went off in '98, and my wife suffered those strokes. But I really enjoyed the board. I enjoyed the trips we had, and I was a certified board member of the electric company. I got a certificate where I attended all these classes where they had taught us this and taught us that. They taught us management, budget management, parliamentary procedure, community relations, and all that. We had classes, and I passed all those classes and was a certified board member about 90, probably 95 or 96. And I really enjoyed on the board, and a lot of more things that happened that I can't recall. I hope I've got them in kind of order. But another thing I was really proud of, we had one of the employees caught fire some kind of way and got burned pretty bad. And I said, well, I thought you had material that didn't burn for these employees to wear. He said, no. I said, well, let's buy fire retardant shirts and pants for these workers. So they did. And I was proud of that. And I was just delighted. Anything that I could do for the employees, and any time that any new equipment come up to buy, I was all for it, even if we had to borrow the money. And the company did borrow a lot of money during those years, and they upgraded the equipment. And when I left here, all the equipment looked good, in good shape, and it looked new, and it wasn't old and rattle-trap stuff. And my daddy always told me when I was growing up, he says, son, you can't chop wood unless you got a sharp axe. And I've always lived according to that theory, that you've got to have good equipment. And I've always kept good equipment on the farm. And at one time we had mighty fine equipment on the farm. Now the last few years it's getting a little bit old, but we're gradually upgrading. Right now we're upgrading a Chevrolet truck, gasoline, until an almost new international diesel truck that will haul about 650 bushels. The trucks we now have, we've got 5 trucks now, and 2 of them only haul 300 bushel. So we're getting rid of that 300 bushel truck and getting one that hauls 650, which that is an efficiency. You got a driver, he goes with 300 bushel or he goes with 650. And it takes the same time and the same effort. And any company that fails to keep up and make things more efficient and do more with less will not be successful.
That's right. Well, Fred, we appreciate your community service. Well, you've done all kind of community service. We appreciate your time on the board and all the things. A lot of progress happened in those years you were there, and we're benefiting from that today, and we appreciate that. Tell me what made you grow up to be so involved in the community.
Well, I guess growing up in New Market in a little town, I knew everybody, and everybody knew me, and everybody knew my daddy because he cut the hair. My daddy cut hair for 15 cents and shaved for a dime from 1920 to 1948. Never raised his prices. And I just guess growing up in a small town like that, and I carried groceries to people's houses when I was little and all that kind of stuff. And I just always liked being around people and I never did like to just sit down and do nothing. And I always liked to be involved and like to be doing something.
As you were growing up, your book tells about a few whoopings you got with a switch. I bet some of the kids watching probably don't know what a switch is.
Well, my mother was active in the community, so she had what they call a Women's Missionary Society, was meeting at our house one day, and she had me and my sister all dressed up nice for the ladies to get there, and of course when the ladies got there, well, they ran us outside. Well, I had a pair of flips. Of course, I guess kids don't know what flips is nowadays, but you had a forked stock and 2 rubber bands and a little rubber pad on the back. You put a little rock in it and you stretched it out and you shot things. And I could shoot pretty good, Well, my flip stock broke. Well, there was no way I could go all afternoon without my flips, so I went into the kitchen and got the butcher knife and went out and was going to cut myself a flip stock, and I just sliced that thumb just about off. The scar's still there after. I was about 7 years old at that time, or 8. That's been 75 years ago. The scar's still there. And of course, when I cut it off, it went to bleeding. And I put my hand down in my little pants, and I walked into the living room where the women was having their meeting. Blood was running all down my leg. It scared them all to death. And of course, Mama went outside, grabbed up the switch that I'd cut off. She wore me out with that switch and then took me to the doctor, and the doctor sewed it up. I remember that real good. And another switching I got is one real cold day, and sometime in November, I guess it was. My grandmother had gone out to the wood pile, and she had her apron full of chips and kindling wood to build a fire. And I was in the room there, and the door was there, and she told me to open the door. And of course, I didn't open the door. I just sat there laughing at her. You know, she had her apron full of wood. And she put that wood down, and she got her a switch, and she wore me out. I was 6 or 7 years old. And so to this day, I've had no trouble opening doors for ladies. I can open them real good. I don't have no problem. So that taught me 2 lessons. You better mind your adults or you'll catch it.
All right, well, you talked about so much about the electricity. Tell folks about what it was like when there was no electricity.
Well, I grew up in Newmarket, and the only electricity was down the main street of the town of Newmarket, and the houses that was on the main street had electricity. But if you was off the main street, you did not have electricity. And of course, we never did live on the main street. We lived on the next street or down that way somewhere. We had no electricity, no running water. You had a well, we had a community well there back of the old bank building, and late in the afternoon, everybody went in and drawed their water for the night. Most people draw up about 3 or 4 bucketfuls of water and go home. And we had no electricity, no lights. We had what we called an Aladdin lamp to read by, and this had a coal oil lamp that my mama had a coal oil lamp that sat on the wall above the stove that she cooked by. But we had an Aladdin lamp that was set on a table that you could read under if you got real close. But then if a bug or something went down the chimney and broke that little fiber mantle in it, your light went out. So that no cooling, no heat, no electricity.
You told a story in your book about where I think you went to Huntsville, and you told about the first time you saw water come out of a pipe.
Yeah, my daddy was playing baseball in Huntsville sometime in the mid-30s. I don't know what the year was, 33, 4 or 5, something like that. And he was dressed at the YMCA building down there. Daddy would be pitching for either the Dallas Mill or the Lincoln Mill or Merrimack Mill. There was 5 or 6 different ball teams in Huntsville at that time. Now the Newmarket team, the man that owned the Newmarket ball team that Daddy pitched for when he was a young man before he married, got killed and a train ran over him, killed him in his car. And the Newmarket ball team disbanded after that. But they'd hired Daddy to come down there to pitch for them. And he dressed at the YMCA building, great old big Y building. I think it's still there. Was the last time I was down there. And first time I'd ever seen water coming out of a pipe. You take a shower, you know. I had never seen anything like that, and I was probably, if it was 33, I'd have been 7, 8 years. I was about 8 years old.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the first car you got, 1928.
Yeah, well, I don't know what year it was, about 32 or 33, I guess. Daddy went to Huntsville. We had a Model T, and it didn't even have a top on it. You just got in it, little old door, and sat down. Daddy drove to town and come back with a 1928 Essex car, and it had huge wooden wheels on the back and had solid tires. It didn't have tires with air in them. Had solid tires, a 28, and that was the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my life. And so that was the car we had from 28 till I think about 37 or 38. It quit, and that wound our car business up for a while.
You talked a lot about that car in your time, and you talked a lot about Newmarket, Plevna area. Tell everybody home where that's at and then how you wound up here.
Newmarket is about 18 miles northeast of Huntsville, Alabama, or about 4 miles south of the Tennessee line at Elora. People are more familiar, I guess, with Elora in this county. And I guess it's about 4 or 5 miles from Elora down to Newmarket. And it was on a railroad track. The NC and St. L railroad track ran through Newmarket. And when I was growing up, the train ran about 3 times a day. Had a passenger train. And it was a thriving little place back then. But as the Depression hit, things kind of folded up and went down. At one time, my daddy said there was be 28 businesses in New Market, and by about 1940 or 41 or 42, I think it was down to about 7 or 8. We had a flour mill, a grist mill, a hat factory, a stave mill, a heading mill, and about 2 or 3 blacksmith shops, a cotton gin, and about grocery stores, drug stores, doctors' offices, and things like that. And they just all folded up. Hotel and a livery stable. I guess people nowadays don't know what a livery stable would be. But a livery stable was a place where the people of the community could take their milk cow and their horses and put them in the barn at night. And the man ran it. Of course, he fed them and watered them at night. And in the daytime, while you went down and got your cow, you took it home and milked it and kept it there and around the house or in your barn lot or something till night, and then you took it back to the livery stable for night to stay there at night.
That's interesting. You was talking about your dad being a barber. He turned into a dry goods store. Tell people at home what a dry goods store is.
Well, my daddy had a barber shop down in what they called Old Town. It was down next to the creek. Well, sometime they built some new buildings up further away from the creek, and they called it New Market, but they always called all of it New Market. But my daddy brought his barber shop from what down and put it up on what was Newtown into a store. Well, then he started into what they called a dry good business. He had overalls, khaki pants, overall jumpers, and then he had shoes and socks and handkerchiefs and bolts of material. Back then, ladies would come in and buy so many yards of material to go home and make their dresses. You didn't see a dress hanging in a store back then, but you had bolts of material. Daddy had maybe 8 or 10 different bolts of material. Called it broadcloth and gingham, and I don't know what all else they called it. Foil, I believe the one they called foil or something like that. But he had 3 or 4 different kinds of broadcloth on bolts, and he'd measure you off 3 yards, 5 yards, or whatever yards you wanted and cut it off. And I don't remember what it sold for, but little or nothing.
You also had hides. Talk about for the folks.
Well, see, back in the Depression, about the only thing that you could sell to make any money was hides, like polecat hides, possum hides, coon hide, fox hide, mink. Oh, if you had a mink, it'd bring $7, $8, a good mink hide. People trapped all the time. My daddy loved to hunt, and he'd go hunting about every other night, and he'd come home with a tow sack full of skunk hides and possum hides, coon hides, and things like that. And you'd skin them and put them on a board and let them dry, and then Daddy was buying these furs in the store. And he'd have a great big pile. I mean, he'd be 3 or 4 foot high. And me and my sister would play on him, and that was a lot of fun. And but Daddy, he'd catch at least 5 or 6 every other night. He'd have a good coon hide. See me like a good coon hide that didn't have any cuts on it. It was grade number 1. Would bring about $3. And I think a skunk hide or possum hide, a good one, was about $1.
What about skunk hides? Did they smell?
Oh, yeah, the skunk hide, they smell pretty good. So one day, a man come up from the newspaper to New Market for some reason. I reckon he's just walking around. So he come in Daddy's store, and a man, he's talking to Daddy, and some young fella come in with a polecat hide, skunk hide. Daddy graded it and said, well, I believe that hide's good enough, I can give you $1 for it. So Daddy paid him $1. And so he said, well, I'm hungry and I need a haircut and a shave. He was pretty rough looking. So Daddy fixed him 2 sandwiches out of something, I don't know what. So he ate those, and then he sat down in the barber chair, and Daddy cut his hair and shaved him and got him looking real good, washed him up good. And the man says, how much do I owe you? He says, $1. So Daddy got his $1 back. He paid for the skunk hide, and so the man went on out. And then in about 2 or 3 weeks, a man come from the health department to Daddy's store. And Daddy didn't have license for the store. He didn't have license for the barbershop. And the man from the health department padlocked the store. He locked it and told him he could not operate that store anymore. Well, Daddy went to town to M.U. Griffin, his lawyer, what he was renting the building from. And so Mr. Griffin went to work and got it fixed where Dad had to build a screened-in portion of the store with screen wire, and had to get he always heated the water on a big old pot-bellied stove for the barbershop. He had to get a big tank and put on top of that stove and pipe the water into a sink. See, Dad didn't even have a sink. Mm-hmm. He just had a washpan. And he had to pipe the water into a sink, and then he had to buy the license and buy the store license, and they had to come back and inspect it. And when they did, he got his license back, so he's back in business. And I did mention the funeral home. There was a funeral home in New Market right about 2 doors up from Daddy's store. Well, when somebody would die, Mr. Payne would have them there in the funeral home. And of course, they'd been sick a month or two laying in the bed, and they'd be all nasty and beard and everything growed up. So Daddy would go up and shave them and clean them up and cut their hair. And I went with him a time or two to hold a little pan of water, And while he would cut their hair and shave them and get them ready for burial. And for that, Mr. Payne paid Daddy $5. And that was about as much as he'd make in the store in a whole day.
Now, you've talked about some really good times in your day, but does the depression years were sort of hard. Tell people what the Depression was and what made times so hard in those.
Well, the first thing that caused the Depression, I think, was the banks. The banks closed. And my daddy had about $100 in the bank, and my mama had about $100 in the bank. That she was the Avon lady. And the bank just closed. And whatever money you had in the bank, you didn't have it anymore.
You didn't get your money?
You didn't get a penny of it out of the New Market Bank. It just closed. And of course, nobody is gone. And of course, then the bank had a mortgage on the crops and tools and equipment, and they made the farmers bring in their little old scratchers and bull tongues and plant little old one-row planters, and they had a pile of that stuff behind the bank, and it just lay there and rotted.
The banks took it.
Banks took it and couldn't do a thing in the world with it.
Wow.
And just like, I guess now the repossessed cars the same way.
Yeah.
And they finally sell them, I guess, for some kind of a price.
Yeah.
And that, I've always thought that brought on a whole lot of the misery that the farmers had. But you absolutely could not get a job for anything. There was no money. I begged people to let me work for them, and one lady says, "Fred, I need such and such done over there," but says, "I don't have any money to pay you. I can't pay you." Well, I went on and did it, and with no pay. Whatever it was she wanted done, I can't remember what it was. It wasn't much. It didn't take me over 15, 20, or 30 minutes to do it. I went on and did it and went on home. But there was no money. All of a sudden, the money just disappeared. Just disappeared. And I don't know why, and I never did. Nobody ever gave me a sensible answer why in about 6 or 8 months just all the money disappeared. And see, about 2 or 3 banks in Huntsville closed, and they never opened back up again. Mm-hmm. The Rising Bank opened and closed, and it never opened back up again.
Just hard times.
It was hard times. People didn't have a job. They didn't have any. There was no such thing as Social Security. There was no welfare. There was no money for anything. No help. Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Let's talk about your early years of education. I mean, you talk about school a lot. You talk about Future Farmers of America and the things you were involved in. You were pretty involved in school.
Well, the first thing I remember about going to school, I'd been there 2 or 3 weeks or a month or so, and this lady in a white dress come up and said she's going to give everybody a shot. So that little girl up on the front row, she called her up and she give her a shot up there. And I said, I'm not going to do that. So I jumped out the window and ran home. And so when the mama said, "Why are you coming home?" I says, "There's a woman down there got a needle and they're giving everybody a shot and I don't want a shot." And so mama grabbed me up and took me back to the school and I got the shot. And I guess the second year I was in school, they combined the second grade, what they call the low second, low third and the high second, they combined them together. I think that's right. And I was in what they call the high second. So they shoved me up to the third, so that made me graduate from high school when I was just 17 years old. And most of the boys were 19 to 20 years old is in my class. One of them was 20 years old when he finished high school. That was in my class. And I was 17. And I always thought that was kind of a disadvantage, me being that young. But it worked out all right, I guess.
Well, today we're talking about there's the future farmers of America even today, but there was FFA back then.
Yeah, well, I joined the FFA when I went into the 9th grade, and we had a good teacher, Mr. Sammy Pate, and he was good, and he somehow or another he kind of took a liking to me and come out on the farm, and he talked to Daddy about such thing as fertilizer. We didn't use any fertilizer and to mount to anything. Little dab on the cotton, never heard of putting fertilizer on the corn. Daddy always thought you ought to grub the bushes off of a hill and plant corn where there wasn't anything last year, and you'd make good corn. Well, we did. We made 30 bushel acre. And so he got to talking to Daddy about buying seed corn. See, we always just puts the good ear back, find a good ear, you throw it back in the tub, and you shelled your own seed corn. You didn't even buy seed corn. So he got talking to Daddy about that. And so when I went into the 10th grade, I was elected president of the local chapter of FFA. Well, Mr. Pate got to talk to me about being a state farmer. Well, he told me all about this stuff, and so he said I needed some projects, and I already had my cattle, and I didn't tell that tale. I'll tell it directly. I had about 4 or 5 head of cattle that was mine, and so Daddy told me, said, now, Mr. Pate said you need a pretty good spot of ground to grow corn if you're not going to put much fertilizer on. Daddy, he didn't believe in fertilizer and corn. And so Daddy told me, says, there's a little bottom back over yonder, about 2 acres. And said, that'd be a good, Mr. Pate looked at it and said, yeah, that'd be a good place. So Daddy told me that says, I'll load the manure on the wagon every day, and you, after school, you can go back and unload it on that corn patch. So I did. So I planted my corn, and it had good luck, and me and my sister talked Daddy out of 100 pounds of ammonium nitrate. And we took a tablespoon and walked down the rows and put a tablespoon of ammonium nitrate right by each stalk. And me and my sister did it. And I made 60 bushels an acre that year, which was double the state average. And I hauled it out to Mr. Moore and sold it to him, and I got $150 for my 2 acres of corn. So that started me off on the State Farmers Project. Then I had my cattle. The next year I had me a cotton patch, and with the year I finished up the 11th grade, I went down to Auburn and got my State Farmers degree, which I still had. So Mr. Pate wanted me to try for the American Farmer degree, and about that time he got drafted into the Army. And of course that wound that up. That didn't do no more. But the tale I was going to tell about the cattle, I had picked cotton out there for a man by the name of R.F. Vandiver. He was one of the big farmers in our community, had several hundred acres of cotton, and had 30 or 40 people living on his farm and picking cotton. There'd be maybe 50, 60 people in the field picking cotton. Well, Miss Annie Pitcock was one of them, and I told her I'd like to go pick cotton. I was 11 years old. So Mama made me a sack, put me about 2 big tow sacks together and made me a sack. And I went out there and I picked, and I got it so heavy I couldn't hardly drag it. So I called Mr. Vandiver, and he sent somebody out there to get my sack. And when they picked it up, said, phew, that's heavy. Said, you must have put green bowls in it. I said, no, I didn't put no green bowls in it. So they weighed it, and it weighed like 50-something pounds. They emptied it out on the ground. And looked it. There's no way that a little old boy like that could pick that much cotton for lunch. And so they didn't find any green bowls at all. So I went back and I filled that sack up again by lunch. And I had a little over 100 pounds picked when lunch come. And most of the men didn't have that much. Grown men, I was out picking the men. Well, that evening I didn't do all that great. But I got up to about 93 or 94 pounds like that. So Mr. Vandiver wrote down on his books, it's 100 pounds, so he paid me $1. And he told Daddy, said, that boy liked about 3 or 4 pounds picking 100, but he said, I just could not dock him 3 cents, so I gave him $1. And
Tell everybody how you got in the cattle business.
So that was my cotton picking tale. And see, I picked cotton that year, and when I got ready to go out and help my uncle pick his cotton on Daddy's farm, well, I had $7, and I'd given it to my mama. This would have been, I guess, in '37. And so Mama says, Fred, I've got that black heifer calf out there in the barn. Says, I'll sell it to you for your $7 you've got. This was like a little while before Christmas. I said, of course, if your mama says do something, well, you do it. I said, yeah, that'd be all right. So I sold Mama for $7. I bought that little black heifer that Mama had out there in the barn that I'd been pulling grass for all summer anyway. And so I had me a heifer calf. Well, we took the calf out onto the farm the next year, and the heifer calf had a calf, and I've been in the cow business ever since I was 11 years old. And until I moved to Tennessee, I don't recall ever buying a female cow. All the cows I had, and when I moved to Tennessee, when I bought the farm over on Fishing Ford Road, I had like 35 or 40 cows, and every one of them had come from that Jersey heifer calf.
Wow.
But after I moved up here and bought more land, I began to buy female cows. But I'd always bought a good bull, and you put a good bull on just a common ordinary cow, and you get a pretty nice calf. So I went into the cow business with $7.
That's a good story. Let's talk about, you mentioned earlier your dad played baseball, and it must have just sort of got in your blood.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your baseball years.
Well, I started playing with Daddy. Daddy quit playing baseball about 40-something. I can't remember I guess it's about 39 or 40. He quit playing in Huntsville. And he absolutely totally quit there for 2 or 3 years.
What position did he play?
He was a pitcher.
He was a pitcher.
And left-handed, and he was good. He could not throw the ball straight to save his life. He threw it kind of side-armed, and it had a little warp on it. But I was right-handed, and so one day somebody from Hurricane come up to the house and asked Daddy on one Saturday if he'd come down and pitch for Hurricane team. And we lived about 6 or 7 miles from the Hurricane school. Dad said, yeah. I said, I believe I will. I said, I hadn't played ball in a long time. I said, I'll be there Saturday. But said, how about letting this boy play in the outfield? Yeah, if you'll pitch, this boy will play. Well, I didn't even have a glove. And so, but Daddy and I had been passing ball. He had a left-handed glove, and he taught me how to catch the ball barehanded. And so I went out there and I played in the outfield barehanded. And with Daddy pitching, there wasn't but 1 or 2 balls hit out in the outfield, and they was on the ground. And so I played that game, and so then, well, you coming back next Saturday? Yeah, I'll be back next Saturday. So we played there for 5 or 6 games, and Daddy finally bought me a glove. So I played 5 or 6 games in the outfield without a glove. So then he got me a glove. And so the season was over, and the next year we played pretty regular. We played, he told him he'd play for him on Saturday and Sunday, and I played in the outfield with the men when I was 15, 16 years old. And but I didn't pitch any. Daddy did the pitching. But I learned to play the outfield, and I could hit pretty good. I wasn't the worst hitter on the team. Mm-hmm. They batted me about 7th or 8th on the lineup, and I couldn't hit it very far, but I could hit the thing.
You had a career in baseball as it goes on.
Yeah, I don't know what happened or how it happened. I never tried to I tried my best to find out how it happened. I never could. But one day long about, I guess it was 43, I imagine it's 43, Daddy told me, he says, you need to go down there to Huntsville, to Lincoln Mills. There's a man down there by the name, Daddy had read in the paper, where Obie Johnson was running the recreation department there for the Lincoln Mills at the ballpark. And Daddy had played against him and with him, and he knew him real well. Said, go down there, and I was driving the car by then. Says, go down there and tell him that Buford Jobe, Lefty Jobe, sent you down here and asked if you'd let him play. Well, I drove down there and I walked in the park and I looked around and I asked somebody, says, is Obie Johnson here anywhere? Yeah, that's him right over yonder. I went over there and told him who I was. He says, how old are you? And I told him I think I was 15. And he said, Daddy said for me to come down here and see if you let me play. And so he called a boy with a mitt and a glove, and let me throw a while. He said, "We got a team from West Huntsville that's coming over here this afternoon to play us." Said, "Would you pitch it for us?" I said, "Well, yeah, I'll pitch it." I'd never pitched a game in my life. So I got out on the mound and I pitched it. I struck out the first 17 batters that come to bat, hit the 18th one in the head, and they quit. And then I went back and pitched another game or two, and he said, "I believe you must be older than 15." I said, "Yeah, I turned 16 about 2 weeks ago." And of course, when I turned 16, I couldn't play with the boys I'd been playing with. Mm-hmm. But I found out I was nearly a year older than the ones I'd been playing with. Mm-hmm. But then the next, in 44, I played then with the Hurricane in the summer of 44 after I graduated from high school, and I went down and played with one of the teams in Huntsville a time or two. And sometime got drafted into the Army and went down there to Fort McClellan, and my knee was swollen up. I had hurt my knee a little bit, twisted it. It was swollen, and I had a bout with a green apple.
What's that?
I'd eat a green apple sometime, I guess about the time school was out, and tore my stomach all to pieces. I had been weighing around 155, 160. And after I got over that, I weighed about 145. I tore my stomach all to pieces. And I had what they call, I guess you call it now, diarrhea, but back then they called it colitis.
Oh.
So but you didn't go to a doctor. I just had chicken soup and lay in the bed and all that kind of stuff for a couple of weeks till I got over it. But I lost from about 150 something down to 145. And so I went down to Fort McClellan to be drafted into the military, and the doctor took one look at my knee and it was kind of sore. And then they put me on a chart and they found out I was colorblind. See, blues and blacks and greens, I can't distinguish between them. It's got to be really dark blue or dark black or dark green, or I think it's all black. And I didn't know that. So they sent me home. And then I'd been stayed down there a couple of days with that knee. And so the doctors, and the Fort McClellan was just covered up with wounded veterans coming back in 44.
Because that was during the war.
Yeah, they had them out in tents, just with old sheeting over them, just by the hundreds down there, wounded, coming back. And the doctor said, "We got no place to put this boy with this swelled up knee." And so they told me to go down to a certain building, and they did, and they filled out the papers and just sent me home. Well, I'd been home about a week, and Mama got a letter from University of Alabama offering me a scholarship to come play basketball and baseball. I didn't make all county, but I made all district. We won 3 games in the district tournament. And so Mama got a letter, said that they would pay me a room and board if I'd come down there and play baseball. Well, Mama wrote back and said I would, and she asked for what the tuition would be. And so they wrote back how much the tuition would be in the books, and Dad said, "Well," said, "I can do that." So they gave me a room and board, and to go to University of Alabama. And I was the first person, I guess, in our family that had ever gone to regular college. So, and I've often wondered, who in the world would have notified University of Alabama that I was a good enough athlete that they wanted me to come down there to play basketball and baseball. And I did play basketball a game or two. We played Kentucky. Kentucky sent their freshman team and our freshman team. And at the half, they was 40-something and we had 20. And it got worse after that.
Oh, man.
And then I did play baseball with the university in the spring of 45. We played a little schedule in the fall of 44. We went over to Columbus Air Base at Columbus, Mississippi. We played Mississippi State, and we played Columbus Air Base. We played 3 games over there and then come home, and then we didn't play no more then until the spring. And we played LSU and we played the Maxwell Field Air Base and played the Gunner Field and like several air bases we played. And we played LSU and played somebody else. I can't remember who else we played. We played 2 college teams and about 4 or 5 air bases. And there I ran into Marvin Rackley. And every time I threw a pitch, he hit a double. And he made the majors. He went on and played for Chicago. Ran into the pitcher up there for Boston. Can't think of his name now. I batted against him. I couldn't hit it with a boat paddle. He went on and pitched for Boston for several years after that.
And you went on and played some pro ball.
I signed. See what happened when I went home in '45. The city of Guntersville got in touch with me and wanted to know if I'd come over and play for them in their city league. I said, "Why, sure, I'm not doing anything." They said, "We'll pay you $10 a game if you win, nothing if you lose." I said, "Well, that's fair enough." So we went over there every Sunday, and they paid me $10 a game for every game we won. This was men now, and I had just barely turned 18 years old. These were men 35 and 40 years old, been playing all their lives. Well, along about the 7th or 8th inning, I began to kind of about give out, and they began to hit the ball pretty good. So Daddy told the manager, says, "When that boy goes down about 6th, 7th, 8th inning, I'll come in and finish it up." So we did, and we lost 2 games. We played Rome, Georgia, and Fort Payne, and Hugh Laco, and I don't know, all the teams around there. And we won about 8 games and lost 2. And so when I went back to college that fall, Coach Frank Thomas called me in his office, and he said, "Jobe, how was your summer?" I said, "It's great." He said, "Did you play baseball?" "Yes, sir, I did." "Did you get paid?" "Yes, sir, you did." They paid me $10 a game. "Well, I guess you realize now you can't play college ball anymore, can you?" I said, "What in the world?" So I lost my scholarship. So I went to cooking at the boarding house for what I could eat, and it stayed down there another year. But Buddy Lewis had scouted me the first year, and so I was over there watching them work out, and here come Buddy Lewis looking for me. And he said, "Why aren't you playing?" So I told him, and he said, "Well, I'm going to be in Huntsville about the 1st of June. It says when you go home, leave here, you stay in good shape, and you work out every day. And if you still got as much on the ball as you had last year, I'll sign you to a professional contract." Well, I went home and told Daddy, and so every day at lunchtime, we would throw about 25, 30, maybe 50 pitches, and I was in good shape. So when he announced in the paper, tryout at Lincoln Mills, I went down there, and I stood around a while and watched him play, and he come over and said, "What kind of shape you in?" I says, "I'm ready." He said, "Well, warm up, I'm going to put you in this next round of players we got." So I warmed up and I put in, and I threw about 3 innings, and I don't think they got more than 1 or 2 hits, maybe a run. And so he signed me to a professional contract, $125 a month. Well, I had never made $125 a month in my life. And he gave me $100 to sign. And I wish I'd have kept that carbon of that $100 I got for signing, but I threw it away like everything else, you know. So away to Johnson City I went. Well, when I got up there to Johnson City, I found out they was going to pay me $125 a month too. So I was making $250 a month. It made my mama so mad. She says, "You mean to tell me that you're making $250 a month playing baseball, and I'm teaching school for $60. Mom had been teaching school for several years for $60 a month, because she didn't have a teaching certificate. She only had a little thing he got during the war, you know. I think regular teachers making about $100 a month. But it made her so mad she could turn red. But after I sent her home $200 or $300, says, "Fred's doing all right."
Yeah, that'd make them feel better.
That made them feel a lot better.
Who'd you play for?
Well, I played for Johnson City, and we played all through what they call the Appalachian League. We played all through West Virginia and Virginia, like places like Pulaski, Bluefield, Welch, Kingsport, Elizabethton, and places like that. We play every night Sometimes we'd play a double header. They'd have on Saturday, they'd have a double header most of the time. They'd have a 7-inning game in the morning. They'd empty the stands and then have a 9-inning game that afternoon on Saturday afternoon. So we only had 18 players and the manager on the team. So you had to be pretty tough to play that much baseball. So I finished that year up, and I went to spring training with the Cardinals in '47, and down at Daytona Beach. You read in the paper about pitchers reporting early. All it was rookie throwing batting practice to these hitters. And I threw batting practice to folks like Marty Marion, Mort Cooper, Bobby Brown, Whitey Karowski. They hit balls back by my head. I know that was flat when they went by my head. They didn't have a screen up in front of you then. They told you to throw 3/4 speed, and I found out pretty quick if I'd throw about all I had, they didn't hit it at all. And I threw that for about, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks. And the fella spiked me on my hand right there. I'm not going to call his name. And spiked me, and the spike marks are still on my right hand. He took 2 or 3 little short steps to spike me on purpose, because I think I'd unbuttoned his shirt a time or two. And
now tell everybody what spiking is. They may not understand.
Well, the baseball players wear shoes with metal spikes on the bottom, and they file the spikes so they'll be good and sharp, you know. And he stepped on my hand right there, and blood was just spurting out of my hand. And I picked up the ball and hit him in the back. And the manager come in and said, well, I guess I better call the name. The manager come in and said, do you know who you hit? I said, I don't care who I hit. He ain't going to do me that way. And it was Enos Slaughter.
Wow.
So about 2 days later, they put me on a little old plane and flew me up to Albany, Georgia. I was now in the Georgia State League. So about a month or 2 after that, they told me I had been traded to the Boston Brave organization. You read in the paper about this trade, you know, of 2 or 3 star players and the undisclosed rookie to be thrown in. I was the undisclosed rookie. Didn't even make enough of me to print my name. So I was to report to Orangeburg, Kentucky. So I reported to Orangeburg, Kentucky in the Kitty League. So we played all through the Midwest, a place like Fulton, Kentucky, Mayfield, Kentucky, places in Kentucky, Frankfort, Illinois, Cairo, Illinois, Cape Girardeau, Illinois, places like that. And I did pretty well. I was 4-0, and I was hitting about 400. And so they said that the team in Omaha was short of pitching for a day or two. So they put me on a bus in Cairo, Illinois, and sent me all the way to Omaha, Nebraska on a bus. And they loaded me on the bus way in the night, got over there about 4 o'clock that afternoon, and I pitched that night after being on the bus all day. And I lasted about 5 innings. And they put in somebody else. Then about 2 days later, I relieved and pitched about 4 or 5 innings. And so then they sent me back to Orangeburg and finished up the season at Orangeburg. And then I come home and got married and played semi-pro ball for Leroy McCollum. He had reestablished the baseball team in Newmarket. He had a feed, seed, and grain and fertilizer business in Newmarket. So he told me that he'd pay me $10 a game to pitch for them. So I married in September, so I started pitching for them. So I pitched for him for about 3 or 4 years. And then I had, my oldest boy was born, and my next boy was born. And I told Leroy at the end of the season, I said, I got 2 boys on the ground and another baby on the way. I says, I'm through, I'm done. Our team had got down to where we was losing more than we was winning. We wasn't playing good ball at all. I said, Leroy, I'm through, I'm done now, I'm quitting.
You started a family. That's best. You started your family.
I had 2 boys already, 2 baby boys.
Tell us about your family. Tell us about your wife. Let's go back to your wife.
Well, let me go a little further on this. So Leroy said, all right. So I quit. So I got my spikes over half sold and fixed back good and polished, put them up. I said, now when my oldest boy gets ready to play baseball, he'll have a nice pair of spikes. Well, long about the middle of March, here come Leroy over to the house in the car. Says, get your spikes and your suit ready, we're going to play baseball. I said, Leroy, I told you I'm through, I'm done. He said, well, I got a scrimmage game in Tullahoma this afternoon at 3 o'clock. I'm not going to play no more. He says, I'll give you $10 if you win. I said, Leroy, I'm not playing no more, I'm done. And he said, well, how about $20 if you win? Well, that back then, that was in 53 or 54, I guess. That's pretty good money, $20 for one afternoon's work. And I said, no, I'm through, I'm done. And he said, how much fertilizer do you need to plant this field of fertilizer? I says, I need a ton. Well, that'd been about $35. Well, now that really did perk my ears up. I'm going to make $35 here. Well, now I hadn't had a ball in my hand since September, since we'd quit playing in September. So I went to the house and told Sarah Joe, I said, get the boys ready, take them over to Mama's, we're going to play one more ball game. I told you was not going to play, you were not going to quit. She had ridden the buses with me for 4 or 5 years. She'd ridden the bus every game, even had to carry the baby, she'd carry the baby. And so we got on the bus, it wasn't about 6 players. I said, Leroy, how are we going to play with 6 players? He said, well, we're going to pick up some. So we picked up Donnie Gamble up there just after you get out of Huntland. He was doing the same thing I was doing. Had a team of mules out in the field harrying off ground for planting cotton. Well, I'd played against Donnie, and he's a pretty good ball player. Played with him and against him. So I'd made 7. So then we pull into Belvedere and pull off the road, pull the bus off the road, down around behind over there to the post office. Well, in a few minutes here out comes Slick Zimmerman. Well, now he was a fine catcher. I had played against him and with him, and he was good. And I never could get him out. He was a good hitter. And we played against him at Cowan. And when you play at Cowan, you lose automatically. You don't win a baseball game at Cowan. Now you can beat Cowan at home, but you can't beat Cowan at Cowan. Mm-hmm. And so he got in. That made 8. So that made me, well, we still won short. So when we got to Tullahoma, got off the bus, here was this nice looking, slender young man, and Leroy gave him a suit. And you know who that was? Charles Harmony, one we call Fuzzy now here at the Rotary Club.
Yeah. And
that made us 9 players.
Wow. And
so when we walked out on the field, I thought you're going to see just, and it was Murfreesboro's college team. They'd already been playing for 2 or 3 weeks and already won about 5 or 6 games. And so I said, Leroy, what in the world have you done? And on the bus, I found out that none of us had had a ball in their hands since they quit playing the previous fall. None of us. I said, there ain't no way we can play a college team. We hadn't even had any batting practice, no infield, no nothing. Oh, we can do it. See, I was so mad, I was upset. I'd have to say I was upset. So I warmed up, and Fuzzy come over there before the game started. He said, that big first baseman, now, if you throw it low inside, he'll hit it hard. And so we started the game, and Slick Zimmerman, he knew 2 or 3 of the boys, and he told me what this could hit and what that could hit. So the first inning didn't go too good. That big first baseman, I threw it kind of down a little bit. Of course, I always had pitched a little low, right above the knee. And I threw that ball kind of, instead of inside, I threw it, tried to get it on the outside. I reckon I got it a little too much at the plate. He like to busted the board on the wall out there. And I come in, I told Slick, I said, Slick, we're going to do something different to these boys. And he said, I tell you what, let's try pitching them above the belt, right down the middle of the plate. And says every time you throw the ball, if it's coming across the letters a little bit high, it's got a little hop on it. Said let's throw them right down the middle, little high, and they'll swing at it. So we went after that. We got to throwing them just above the belt, below the letters, right down the middle of the plate, and they were swinging at every one of them, and they was popping it up, hitting high fly and popping it up. And our center field boy named Fred Jobe, named Tom Jobe, and I knew if they hit it high enough and stayed in the park, he'd go get it, because he could go get it. So along about the 7th inning, they was about 6 and we was about 5 or something like that. And so I got a double, and somebody else got a single, and I got on third, and somebody else got on base, and here come Fuzzy. He had struck out every time he'd been to bat during the game. And they threw him a high ball, and he tomahawked it and hit the boards out there, and we scored 3 runs. So that gave us a run lead. I think it was in the 8th inning. So Leroy, when I started out, he says, Fred, now your ton of fertilizer's on the line. So we got them out. We beat that college team. And next morning, I looked out the window, and there was a ton of fertilizer sitting under the hackberry tree, and I was so sore I couldn't hardly get up. But we beat the Murfreesboro College team.
That's a great story. Sports a big part of your life, but farming was too. But family, you had a good mother and father, and then you met Sarah Jobe. Tell us about meeting Sarah Jobe.
I met Sarah Jobe down at the University of Alabama in the summer of 45. She had transferred from Montevallo. I was a sophomore and she was a junior. And she was 6 months older than I was, but in Mobile, I only went to school 11 years, so she'd already had 2 years of college. And I was cooking. I'd lost my scholarship, as I said before, and I was cooking this boarding house. And her brother was one of the ones that come over to the boarding house, and he was among the first ones there every morning, because he was a good old country boy like I was, you know. He was going to be a lawyer. So he wanted his egg over light, and all the rest of them, we scrambled them. So I fixed his egg over light. So after about 2 or 3 weeks, I was standing there in what we call the soup store, and he and his sister walked up. So he introduced me to his sister, Sarah. And I was dating 5 or 6 different girls at that time, because I was president of the Wesley Foundation. And I had my own desk and a little office, you know, and I had to file on about 500 or 600 Methodist girls, you know. I could just pick out anybody I wanted to and call them. So I was doing all right. And I was dating 5 or 6 girls at the time, and he introduced me to her. And about 2 weeks after he introduced me to her, our pianist called and said her boyfriend had come home from the Army, and she couldn't play the piano. And so I called Sarah Jobe. I said, would you play the piano for our church service today? I'd be glad to. And when I said, well, I'll pick you up at Master's house in the morning at 9 o'clock, and we'll go on over to the Doster Hall where we had our church service. So I picked her up, carried her over there, and she sat down to play that piano. It was so beautiful. And from then on, I just culled all the other girls off, and I started dating her. And I proposed to her in February of 46, I guess.
So how long were you and Sarah Jobe married?
63 years. We married in 47. When I proposed to her, I told her, I said, now, I don't want to get married until I have my fling with baseball. She says, well, my daddy told me that I couldn't get married till I finished college. And she lacked about 1.5 years. So I said, that'll work out just right. So she finished college, cum laude, and she got her a job in Mobile in the daycare center, teaching young kids the elementary science and how things multiply and all that kind of stuff. So she worked there until we got married in 47, until I got through playing baseball. We married in 47 in Tanner, little town called Tanner Williams that was named after her great-granddaddy. And we were married 63 years. Beautiful marriage. No man could ever ask for more.
Tell us about y'all's kids.
Well, Charlie was born first, and then Leaf, and then Elizabeth, my daughter, and then David, my son. And Charlie got a scholarship to the University of Alabama in Huntsville in math, and he went 2 years. And Leaf went over to Florence, played baseball with the Florence College team. My daughter went to Florence and got married and transferred to the University of Alabama, and she finished with a degree in art. Taught school 34 years, I believe, in Jefferson County, Alabama. And she was voted the most outstanding art teacher in the state of Alabama in, I believe, 92. And she's been retired now about 3 years. And David was in the banking business for several years with the farm credit business. And now he's with Frito-Lay out there inspecting the potatoes and the oil and the corn and stuff they unload, taking samples to the lab and stuff. He helps unload those trucks. And my son Leaf is in Florence, Alabama, he's an agent for Ameriprise, a financial advisor, and he's been successful. I have 7 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren, and I'm proud of my family, and they've all been successful, no problems at all.
Let's take one mention of the Rotary Club.
Well, Mr. Dave Buchanan introduced me into the Rotary Club, I believe in '75, if I'm not right. And in '88, I was elected president. And I served my year president like you served. Don, you was president. Mm-hmm. And then I got interested in the Paul Harris Fellowship when I was president in '88. And I'm a 3 times Paul Harris Fellowship in Rotary. And I've been a member since '75, I think. I've enjoyed it. It's one of the greatest things I ever joined was the Rotary Club. Met some of the finest people and enjoyed it.
You know, when we look at your book, the way it was, looking back at times it was pretty good back those days. Well, even though it was hard, but
hard.
It was...
I tell you, hard times makes you tough. Then you can really appreciate the good times.
That's true. Well, we appreciate you coming by and sharing all this with us. We could talk, for 3 days. You've got so many stories to tell, and we appreciate you taking the time to write some things down to share with history, and also we appreciate you taking the time to share it with us here on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6.
Well, I've enjoyed it. It's a nice, cool place in this hot weather.
It's hot weather. Thank you very much. We've had Fred Jobe, William Fred Jobe with us this morning, and we appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for watching here on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6. I'm Don Counts. We'll see you back here next time.